Welcome everyone. So we left off our last lesson talking about the TP-Link Archer router and the exploits and vulnerabilities that were found through the Zero-Day initiative. And you may recall that there was actually vulnerabilities for both the internal network side, so through the local area network, and also even scarier through what we call the wide area network, which is the internet connected side or the internet facing side of the router. So in our last lesson, when we were talking about this, imaginary smart lock that we were coming up with, in our design, we actually didn't directly expose our IoT device to the internet. However, there are a couple scenarios, either intentionally or intentionally, where this happens. So I just want to take a quick lesson and chat about those. I've updated our drawing here and I've actually added in a router. So I'm just going to draw again this kind of cloud here, and we'll put it at the edge of the cloud. And then we'll say everything on this side of the router, on the inside, this is that WLAN. So this is the local area network. In our case, they're all wireless, but this could also just be a LAN to wired. But the idea is that, so these are all, they all have private IP addresses, all of these devices, and they're sitting inside of our home network. And then on this router, we of course have the WAN port, which is what connects it either to a modem, or in some cases, these routers, they are a combination of a router and a modem, and they'll do that directly, but that actually is then going to connect it out and be internet facing. So what can happen with this wide area network connection side is that sometimes, either intentionally or unintentionally, we will expose ports out to just the broader internet. And this, again, of course, really opens up the attack surface for these devices in that we now have these ports that generally would only be exposed on the internal network, actually exposed out to the external internet. So outside of having this direct, wide area network connection and ports exposed to the internet, there is another way that we can have devices that communicate, directly outside of our local area network to devices that are out on the internet. And before we talk about that, what we should chat about quickly is why we do generally this polling with the cloud-based connections. So in our previous lesson, we chatted about how if we want to have our smart lock, for example, talking out to a device that's just out in the internet, like an app or something like that, out in the internet, then what we're actually going to do is we're going to pull back or initiate this kind of phone home connection to an API endpoint, what's most likely an API endpoint. And we're going to have this device reach from inside the network outwards and initiate that connection. And this is much easier to get started than trying to come, just from any device outside of the network and back in. And one of the main reasons for that is, of course, we're going to have some sort of static IP, or we're going to have a domain that's attached and associated with this, so we don't have to try and figure out what the IP is coming back in. And also, if we're going to be, sending this request out and then it's just going to be connecting back in, well, generally our firewalls and our devices on the exterior are going to, by default, allow these connections back to us. It's no different than if we opened up an app on our phone or a web browser and we're just going out to the internet and then we're expecting a response back. So it's going to allow this back into our network. And then, of course, from our smartphone, then we can just talk to the server and it can pass on any data we need through this kind of like polling and phoning home connection. So one interesting thing with IoT devices that you can sometimes do and sniff out is just you can see all of the different connections that it's making back. It's going to be a lot of times more than just one of these API endpoints or servers. And some concerns with these IoT devices, one particular concern that I have is all of the privacy concerns and the different stats and things that it's collecting from the internet and constantly sending those back. So we're not going to really focus on specifically those privacy concerns, but just something of interest is all those connections and phone homes that it makes back out of the network. So this, polling and opening up this connection and passing the information back and forth for our smart lock, this works really well because really we just have very minimal amount of data that we need to send. We just got to kind of say like, what's the status of the lock? Do we need it to be unlocked, locked? Maybe there's a little bit of management data, but really we're chatting about very minimal amounts of data. Well, you see, I've also added in here an IP camera into the mix. So just your standard IP camera. And if we were away from home and we want to check, what's the feed with this IP camera? Well, if we're streaming, even in like a standard definition, that's a lot of data to be putting through cloud infrastructure. And maybe we don't want to do this because that's going to incur like a big monthly fee for us. So we want to have some way to go directly from our phone, and we'll just utilize our own internet instead of this cloud infrastructure to upload this. So how can we securely and without having to do too much configuration actually just get this direct connection from outside of the internet and then into our network? Well, one very common thing that you'll see for things like IP cameras or other devices where we have to either exchange a lot of data or we don't want it to be stored in a cloud server is we can use a peer-to-peer method where what we'll do is we'll actually initially have a handshake where we'll reach out still to our cloud infrastructure, and we'll ask it, how do we get in touch with this IP camera? And the IP camera is also going to constantly be in contact with this cloud server, pulling back, and it's just going to be sharing, its location and its IP address, so how it can be connected to. And then our cloud server is going to then, pass this information back to whatever this client is in this kind of peer-to-peer handshake. So we call this P2P handshake. And then once we have that handshake, then our actual device that's out in the internet, it can connect back directly into our device, and we can then send that data out. So this isn't too uncommon, especially for things like IP cameras, and this is definitely another avenue that we can look to exploit or attack. And this is definitely something that black hat hackers are exploiting out in the wild. So we're not really going to focus too much on this, exposed to the internet portion in this course, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this is also another definite attack surface for some IoT devices. And it's definitely one of the more scary ones because it is a really good avenue for hackers or attackers to be able to breach this perimeter of a home network and then get inside. So the one thing that I do want to show just really quickly is how we can find these devices and how hackers are able to find them. And to do that, we're going to hop over to the browser and we're going to take a look at Shodan. So I'll meet you over there. So if you're not familiar with Shodan, it's definitely worth a checkout. You can get to it from shodan.io. And you don't need an account. You can purchase different subscriptions to this, and it's going to increase the functionality that you have. But even on the free account, you can get started and start seeing some pretty interesting stuff. So you see here, it's the search engine for the Internet of Everything. And it allows us to search for devices that are connected to the internet, either intentionally or unintentionally. And it's very interesting for finding various devices like routers and IoT devices, and really gives an idea of just what's connected out there to the internet and how hackers can exploit these vulnerabilities that they find in IoT devices that are actually connected to the internet. So the way that Shodan works as a search engine is it actually caches the header to responses when it kind of grows out and crawls the internet. So, if the device manufacturer or its part number or serial number or anything like that is in the banner of that response, then we can actually search for it. So if we, pull up, for example, I was already searching just to check this, the part number of the router that we're experimenting on. Well, if we search for that and we just run a search, can see that there is actually 33,550 of these devices that are actually connected to the internet, which is pretty crazy. And the top port is 80, so we have a lot of these web ports exposed to the internet. So hopefully they're using good passwords and strong passwords for those, but definitely something that's dangerous to be exposed out to the internet. And you can see here, interestingly too, it gives us the country. So we've got almost 7,000 of them are in Russia. So another interesting thing that Shodan is famous for, and I will just show you, is finding webcams or IP cams that are directly connected to the internet. And a really popular one is this webcam XP to search for, because I believe in its default configuration, so this is a much older IP cam or webcam, and I believe in its default configuration, it was just generally exposed out to the internet. So people are still running these, whether it's known or unknown. These are exposed to the internet, and you can see Shodan actually even caches an image of this, so you can actually see what is being displayed here. We got this banner grabbing of the webcam XP, and if we scroll down, we can start seeing some feeds. So this is the current day right here, actually right now, and we can see some feeds on here. And I'm not even going to scroll, any further, because you can see some really interesting things on here and find some really interesting things. With that being said, I do just want to give a really quick warning of, the ethical hacker spiel and, being really careful about the legality of what you're doing. So I'm just looking, and I would say, for me and for the region I'm at, this, kind of hands off, just looking, that's okay. It can be really tempting, though, with the things that you find on Shodan and what is actually exposed to the internet, to do even more than just looking, and start, doing some poking around, entering default passwords in, all that kind of stuff. And I would be very careful and think twice about, how you do that or what you're doing and what is legal in your region. So that's all I'm going to say on that. And I'll wrap up this lesson here on IoT devices and their exposure to the internet. I'll see you over in the next lesson, where we're going to pick up and look at some OSINT for our router and how we can figure out some more details about it. So I'll see you over there.